Well, as we move on to verse 6, where Paul begins to delineate the specific qualities that should characterize the leaders that Titus was charged with finding to lead the churches on the island of Crete, the very first thing he says is an elder must be blameless. As is typical with Paul's letters, he always starts with the positives, and he begins by listing the positive qualities to look for, things that would be really kind of externally obvious. In other words, don't overlook the obvious when you're talking about these candidates. And in a way, these were things that other people would say about these potential elders rather than what they would say about themselves. It's not like they walk in and do an interview, which is one of the craziest things in our culture, especially with regards to the church, because one of the things that Paul said is, that in his letter to Timothy, he said an elder should not be a novice. We do often translate that as being a new believer or new in the faith. My oldest son one time put it to me in a way that I had never thought of, but I think was equally true. He said, also, he shouldn't be new to you. In other words, basically, leadership is something that should percolate up from the bottom and rise to the top within a church. In other words, people who are in leadership positions are people who should be part of that community of faith. And yet we have this system today where we hire guns from out of town. We want gunslingers to come in and fight off the bad guys. And it's kind of crazy because our candidating for pastoral roles is often like a horse race. And what we're doing is whoever has the best sermon, that becomes the one we pick. And yet we really know nothing about the character of that person. And it's interesting because even in my role, the church had been going for a couple of years when I came to the church. And yet the people who asked me to come are people who had been involved with me in ministry at Calvary in Costa Mesa. So they knew me from that context and that experience. So it wasn't an unknown quantity to them. And so as a result, it was really easy to just kind of meld in and begin to follow plus they understood what my philosophy of ministry was and all the other things that go with it. So it wasn't like you're trying to start all over. But the thing that I've seen so many times is people will bring in a new pastor to lead a church, and he's really on a different page. He's come from a different background, a different spiritual culture. He has a different set of objectives, sometimes even very different theology, and it becomes hugely disruptive. And so, we just kind of don't do that. We before we ever bring anybody on our staff, we require that they be part of our staff, part of our church for an extensive period of time so that we can really find out whether they're part of our community, if they're just looking for a new gig. Because I hate to say it, that even in the religious world, there are a lot of guys who are just looking for a new gig, maybe one that pays better or is, in their eyes more significant. And because the problem is, if they don't get what they want, they just leave as quickly as they came. And so that creates such huge disruption. That changeover in pastoral leadership is kind of like a divorce for a lot of people. And so, many times churches just never or takes years to recover from that experience. So when he tells them that you're looking for an elder, he said there's certain things that must be, the positives that have to be there before you even look at it. And the very first thing he says, he has to be blameless. Now, we need to understand the word blameless here, I think, in a sensible context, because it doesn't mean that he has to be perfect. I think I've shared before when we were talking about Timothy, how that I had a church send me a letter one time asking if we had any of our staff that would qualify to meet the candidate structure for their church. And as I read what they were looking for, I thought, I wanted right back to him and said, I don't think Jesus is available. Because, I thought, who can live up to this? They were looking for perfection. I get it. They'd probably been burnt pretty bad and pretty disappointed, and now they were trying to ensure that they'd never have their hearts broken again. I understand that dynamic. But the whole point is that we have to be realistic here, that pastors, spiritual leaders are people. They're going to have good days, they're going to have bad days, they're going to have strengths, they're going to have weaknesses. But when you look at the overall picture, we say, are they blameless? And that primarily that implies that they have a record of morality. They aren't tainted by anything that would be counted as immorality, like greed, lust, hatred, envy, violence. Sexual immorality in particular is something in this day and age that we have to be very careful about, because this is a person who is matured enough in their faith that the idea of intentionally violating the laws of God is really kind of anathema to them. And I think it's important to realize that there are some sins in people's lives that disqualify them for at least a very significant period of time. Because sometimes we just look at a person's gift. And there are people who are very gifted. They're very good communicators. They're very good at relating to other people. They may be very organized and on top of it, strong leader and all that sort of stuff. And yet underneath, there's this rot that's growing inside of them. And that's why you don't just look at the gifts. Now, it's important. If you're going to have somebody be a pastoral leader or a teacher, they have to be gifted to teach. That's critically important, or everybody will be snoozing in the pews. But at the same time, if they have any kind of taint of history of sexual immorality or unfaithfulness, if they've ever been convicted of some kind of financial dishonesty or things of that nature, I mean, you can go through a long list of things. If they got in a fist fight in the parking lot with the last board of elders they served with, well, that's something that should be a very real concern. And I like the way that Spurgeon put it. He said that if they've repented, he says that it has to be that their repentance is more famous than their sin was infamous. So I'm not saying that they can't have some bad moments or bad failings in their past, but it has to be something that's so famously recovered from that it's no longer something that people look at them and that's what they see. Because that's really the problem. I mean, if people look at you and say, I can't listen to you because I know that there's this corrupt, immoral part of your character, well, then you've lost the battle before it's even started. And so basically, it's someone who doesn't have that kind of baggage hanging on to them. That secondly, he goes on and says that they have to be the husband of one wife. And this is the idea of living in marital stability or unity and harmony. Obviously, and most commentators would readily agree that first and foremost, what he's talking about is the problem of polygamy. That in the ancient world, polygamy was not uncommon. Not a lot of people could afford to be a polygamist, but it was not necessarily a common, especially in the Eastern cultures. But it also refers to somebody who has been through a series of marital relationships. That doesn't mean that a person who is single can't be a pastor. I would say no. It doesn't disqualify you if you've never been married or if you're a widower or thing of that nature. But the whole point is that there is an advantage to having been married in the fact that you understand the dynamics that married people go through. But it's not a disqualifier in any way, shape, or form. The issue more commonly in our day and age is, what about a person who is divorced? And here again, I don't take a liberal view, but I think I take a fair and objective view, that I think divorce happens and it's not always the fault of both parties. And in other words, we can sit there saying, well, if a divorce happens, it's because everybody is guilty. But if a marriage stays together, everybody is guilty as well. I could say that it would have been easy for my wife and I to get a divorce. Probably, especially in the early days, the reason we never did was because we knew it was sin. We knew that divorce was not an option if we were going to live a life that was honoring to Christ. Now, that may not sound terribly romantic to many people. Many people like to believe, well, we were so terribly in love, we couldn't think of living without each other. But we all know, if you've been married for any length of time, a week or more, that you can have conflicts in a marriage that are so painful and so hurtful that you want to walk out. You want to escape that pain. And more we find in this day and age that divorce has become an option. In fact, we have so many people that have grown up and come out of divorced or broken homes that they get married with the kind of expectation that's what's going to happen. In fact, it's become so common that a lot of young people aren't even getting married anymore. They're cohabitating, because leaving a bad relationship is easier when you're not legally entangled with them. And that's what marriage does. It's a legal contract that entangles you. And so they want to be able to walk away. And it's amazing to me that we treat divorce so casually, and so we have normalized it And when in fact, when we talk about truth and reality, it is one of the most abnormal things that a person can go through. But what happens if somebody has been divorced? Are they immediately disqualified? I would say not if they're the innocent party, not if they're the one who wanted the marriage to stay intact, they wanted the marriage to survive, they were willing to do whatever they could to save the marriage. I would say, no, I don't think that necessarily disqualifies them. But I also say, when you go through something like that, you need time to recover. You need time to restore your life, your family, your home. And so I think it's important that we keep these things, this perspectives balanced on these things. So the husband of one wife, yeah, marital stability, unity, harmony. Because one of the things that I found in ministry is I can't be fighting with my wife and be fighting the devil at the same time. I need to be in a peaceful, coherent relationship, compassionate, loving relationship with my wife, because somebody has to have my back while I fight the spiritual battles that often come with leading a church. I hope that makes sense. We'll wrap this up tomorrow. God bless you.